This is too stupid even for him. Those are the words of Donald Trump's niece, Mary Trump, in her social media reaction to Donald Trump's latest proof that he is unfit to serve as president of the United States. Mary Trump was reacting to Donald Trump's social media post of a message to the Prime Minister of Norway, in which Donald Trump, in what appears to be more evidence of cognitive decline, possibly cognitive collapse, says that because the country of Norway did not give him the Nobel Peace Prize, even though the country of Norway has nothing to do with choosing Nobel Prize winners, Donald Trump is now even more eager to take Greenland away from Denmark, which Donald Trump might not know is actually a different country from Norway. Those are two different countries. Donald Trump's stone-cold ignorance has been a defining characteristic of his entire public life. And so it is possible Donald Trump has never known that Norway and Denmark are two separate countries. Donald Trump might think that Denmark is the capital of Norway, or the other way around, or maybe he once knew they were separate countries, but now his 79-year-old increasingly shattered brain can no longer hold on to facts like that. The Greenland thing is, and always has been, a Trump diversionary tactic. Trump is no more serious about it now than he was the first time he mentioned it over 6 years ago. 6 years from now, Donald Trump will have done nothing. Donald Trump is never going to do anything in Greenland. He's not going to buy the place. He's not going to invade the place. But he is going to talk about Greenland every day that he can, because the American news media cannot resist saturation coverage of such a simple issue. And every bit of coverage of Greenland is not coverage of the Epstein files, as we will be covering tonight. More than 99% of the Epstein files, Donald Trump is now illegally hiding. We will be covering that story tonight. And every news mention of Greenland is not coverage of what Donald Trump's invasion forces did not change in Venezuela, where the regime that was in power before Donald Trump's invasion remains in power tonight. And every moment of coverage of Greenland is not coverage of Donald Trump's invasion forces in Minneapolis and other parts of the country that did not vote for Donald Trump. Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary, who is by far the most incompetent Treasury Secretary in history, once again faced Sunday morning questions yesterday that he just could not answer.
If the United States were to take Greenland by force, how would that be different than Russia's annexation of Crimea?
Look, I believe that the Europeans will understand that this is best for Greenland, best for Europe, and best for the United States.
That man is going to spend the rest of his life claiming that he saved us from Donald Trump's worst impulses. Marco Rubio will do the same thing. Most Trump cabinet members will be claiming that for the rest of their lives. His Secretary of Labor won't claim she did that, because there is very little evidence that she's ever spoken to Donald Trump, and no one would know she actually is the Secretary of Labor if Rupert Murdoch-owned New York Post wasn't reporting on her under the headline, Inspector General Probe Uncovers Labor Secretary Lori Chavez de Ramirez Office Booze Stash and Strip Club Visit with Subordinates. The Post, citing 5 sources, reports, quote, the investigation has also confirmed that rumors the secretary pursued an inappropriate relationship with an underling were discussed internally months ago and dismissed by her chief of staff, Ji-Hun Han, who was put on leave Monday along with his deputy, Rebecca Wright, 3 of the sources affirmed. The Secretary of Labor has denied wrongdoing through an attorney, and the Labor Department declined to comment. Such is life in the Trump cabinet. Donald Trump is the most difficult client the Supreme Court has ever had. And yes, I mean client, not litigant, because the Trump Supreme Court justices seem to treat him as their legal client rather than a litigant appearing before them, seeking their impartial judgment. Surely Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, along with at least a couple of the Trump appointees, may have spent the last months struggling to hold together a majority to rule in favor of the unconstitutional Trump tariffs. This would require the Trump-controlled Supreme Court to ignore the Constitution, but they've done that for him before. That's not hard for them. They basically functioned as his criminal defense lawyers in creating a criminal immunity for Donald Trump that no previous president ever had. There is not a single justice on the Supreme Court who knows as much about international trade and the Constitution as any member of the Court of International Trade, which is a special federal court whose jurisdiction is exclusively international trade cases. That's all they do. They are not generalists like the Supreme Court. And the Court of International Trade ruled unanimously, that Donald Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional. The Court of International Trade, in their unanimous ruling, which included 2 Trump-appointed judges, said that it is unconstitutional for Donald Trump, quote, to impose any tariff rate he wants on any country at any time for virtually any reason. And that is exactly what Donald Trump has been doing. And that is exactly what the Court of International Trade said is unconstitutional. The Court of International Trade said that Donald Trump's tariffs, quote, sound the death knell of the Constitution. The Court of International Trade has never written a more dramatic opinion than they did in the case striking down Donald Trump's tariffs, which is now being considered by the United States Supreme Court after Donald Trump appealed the ruling of the Court of International Trade to the United States Supreme Court. And if you are a Trump Supreme Court justice sitting there for months trying to help Donald Trump with his unconstitutional tariffs, the one thing you wanted him to do while you were considering his tariff appeal is not impose any more crazy tariffs. The one thing Samuel Alito and others needed from Donald Trump is to just stop threatening crazier and crazier tariffs. And if you're Donald Trump's Solicitor General, who argued the case for Donald Trump to the Supreme Court, you were surely hoping that Donald Trump would just stay silent on tariffs until the Supreme Court ruled. But, in fact, Donald Trump has continued to threaten crazy tariffs while the Supreme Court is considering his appeal. And this weekend, Donald Trump did it again, and he did it as crazily as ever. On Saturday, Donald Trump said, quote, starting on February 1st, 2026, all of the above-mentioned countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, will be charged a 10% tariff on any and all goods sent to the United States of America. On June 1st, 2026, the tariff will be increased to 25%. This tariff will be due and payable until such time as a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. Imagine those Republican Supreme Court clerks desperately trying to twist the Constitution into the grotesque shape they would have to create to accept the Trump tariffs. And then Donald Trump ruins your weekend with that social media post that is the governing equivalent of full-blown dementia, an irretrievably lost mind. When you work for Donald Trump, as the most pathetic Treasury Secretary does, and as some Supreme Court justices appear to do, he will humiliate you. It is impossible to work for Donald Trump as a supporter in Congress, like the Speaker of the House and every Republican in the House and Senate on most issues, without Donald Trump humiliating you repeatedly. And members of your family will be saying what Donald Trump's niece says about him. This is too stupid even for him. Scott Bessent's ritualistic Sunday morning humiliations found a new low even for him this weekend when Kristen Welker asked him about Donald Trump's utterly insane criminal investigation of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell.
Axios reported that you were not happy about DOJ's investigation, that you told President Trump as much. Axios writes, quote, a perturbed Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told President Trump late Sunday that the federal investigation into the Federal Reserve chair made a mess and could be bad for financial markets. That's according to two sources familiar with the call. Is that accurate?
Well, you know what, Kristen? I'm not going to discuss my conversations with the president, but if I said that, I was wrong.
Oh, if I said that, I was wrong. And there the Treasury Secretary wins the prize for the most pathetic reply ever publicly delivered by an already fully humiliated Trump cabinet member. If I said that, I was wrong. Scott Bessent and his husband, John Freeman, have 2 children. How do they explain that to their kids? How do the kids explain it to themselves? Imagine watching your father do that on TV. What are the words that could possibly explain that to you about your father? What is the lesson your father is teaching you there? What is the lesson Scott Bessent is teaching us all about the Trump cabinet and the Trump Congress and the Trump Supreme Court? Anne Applebaum's latest piece in The Atlantic is titled Trump's Letter to Norway Should Be the Last Straw. For Scott Bessent and the Trump Quislings and the Trump cabinet and the Trump Congress, there is no last straw.